Hello, I'm Dr. Paul Mattis, and I'm here to help you understand a little bit more about how to use the humility module. This video deals with the pre activity portion of the curriculum. So let me walk you through that to get started. It is important that you remember before using this that you have worked your way through step one, which is that overview uh, uh, paper that we put together to help you get a perspective on how to get started. That document provides context on which each of the virtue modules are based. As you see in there, the instructions are written to parents, but they'll apply to any leader who's working with the youth ages 5 to 25. Since the family is the foundational one, that's the one that we're going to be focusing on. But as I said, they can be used with any group of young people. Now, imagine you're part of a team that's competing in a competition, and at the end, your team wins and everyone's excited. However, when the awards are given out to everyone, you don't get one. What do you think? How's that make you feel? Suppose instead all the recognition went to your coach instead of you and your teammates. How would you respond? It's common for an individual to respond with a sense of, that's not right. The person who's responsible for the outcome should receive the award. They're the ones who should get the recognition. One aspect of humility is to learn to give proper credit to those who deserve it. We're comfortable when we're the recipients, but what happens when the credit goes to someone else? When you deserve recognition but don't get it, this is like what happens when you take credit for accomplishing something without recognizing that God deserves the glory. God's the one who enabled you to have the ability, the strength, the energy, and the determination to succeed. He's the one who deserves the recognition, the praise, the glory, and honor. One of the first steps in learning humility is to surrender your rewards to God. This will lead to surrendering control of your life to Him. Humility is a virtue that is rooted in Christianity, in particular what Jesus did on the cross. Prior to him, many cultures were based on an honor shame model. In that situation, in that culture, everything was done to gain honor and to avoid shame. Therefore, the idea of humbling oneself was not a common way of living. But when Jesus came, since he came and modeled humility, this virtue of humility has become central to the life of any believer. The root meaning of humility in the Bible is to bow down, to not rise far above the ground. This requires a deep sense of one's moral littleness. It's having lowliness in mind, or lowliness of mind, meaning having a humble opinion of oneself. To quote C.S. Lewis, this is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. Now, the Bible reveals God's view toward those who are humble. Let me give you four examples, two from the Old Testament and two in the New Testament. Second Chronicles chapter 7, verse 14 says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and will heal their land. David writes in Psalm 25, verse 9, he leads the humble in justice and he teaches the humble his way. And then Paul writes in Philippians chapter 2, verse 3, do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility of mind, regard one another as more important than yourselves. And finally, in Colossians chapter 3, verse 12, Paul writes, so, as those who have been chosen of God, holy and beloved, put on a heart of compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. So we see that God desires his people to have his humility, which means they know how to have a right view of themselves. Humility presumes a high position from which one can lower oneself. However, one does not obtain this position alone. God created each person in his image. We refer to that as the image of God or the imago Dei. Psalm 8 reminds us that God made humans as the peak of his creation, just a little lower than God himself. Furthermore, many others have invested in this person, including family, friends, teachers, pastors, and many, many others. This has enabled the person to be in a high position such that humility ought to be possible. Yet, this person does not feel a need to communicate this high position to others. They don't have to laud it over someone else. Now, As with the other virtues, humility does not exist in a person alone. There's a community in which it develops and in which it is expressed. This expression requires working for the good of the community. It's called the common good. It's important to note that being humble is not the same as being humbled. When one is being humbled, it is a voluntary decision to act toward others that is for the benefit of the others. Being lowered by others is humiliation, which is destructive to both the one humbling someone and the one being humbled. Therefore, humbling yourself is a voluntary decision to reach down to those in the community who are in need. It's an action that began as a virtue inside. One of the key attributes of leadership is serving others. If someone had not learned humility, the ability to influence others is hindered. In fact, excellence requires one to be humble. This enables the person to realize that more must be learned. As a result, others will be able to speak into the life of the humble individual. It might require allowing someone to point out an area where growth is needed. The one who is filled with pride cannot accept this and rejects the opportunity to grow. The one who is humble is able to receive the guidance and become more mature. Now, previously, we've already discussed the comparison of the tree of vices with the tree of virtues. That's in previous material. One element that's important is the place of pride in the tree of vices and humility in the tree of virtues. When one lives out of self, pride appears. On the other hand, when one lives out of Christ, through the power of the Holy Spirit working in and through that person, humility appears. This becomes a tool that can be used in determining what is necessary in the development of character. When working with youth, it is important to remember that this distinction may be a way to help identify when work is needed to be more humble is present. If pride appears, more time on humility is necessary. Remember, this work is being done in response to the transformation that the Holy Spirit desires to complete in the individual. The list of activities that's associated with this module for developing humility includes some that are intended to focus on a particular age range. Others could be used with many different ages. As you read through them, select the one or ones that you believe will be important for your family. As stated in the overview, you may need to adapt them to your particular setting and time. Since no two people are exactly the same, you might need different ones for each child. Maybe none of these will be what you need. However, it might trigger some creativity on your part to develop ones that accomplish the goal of establishing life habits that lead to humility, eventually becoming part of the character of the children. You may notice that some of the activities presented in this module on humility involve thanking others. This reinforces the idea that the virtues are integrated with each other. No virtue exists alone. So more than one virtue might be learned from any single activity. When the focus behind the activity is on humility, then that's the virtue that'll be formed. However, in the next module, which is gratitude, that same activity might be used to focus on gratitude, resulting in developing that particular virtue. Since you're working on developing habits, repetition is very important. If possible, repeat the activity at regular intervals, preferably even every day. It's also important to do these at the same time each day, and if possible, even in the same setting. These factors will enhance the learning that occurs as the brain creates circuits that will be repeated over and over until they become natural. Then they're a natural part of you, and we call that your second nature. This means the practices of being humble are more likely to be occurring without the need of specific activity as a reminder. This is what occurs in Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Now, turn your attention to the next video where we'll talk about the specific list of activities and how you might use them. Thank you.